Well, that BRICS Summit gets underway in Johannesburg on Wednesday. It is, of course, an annual international conference attended by the heads of state from the 5 members of the bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. However, this year, South Africa has extended the invitation to other African countries and developing economies. CGTN's Yolisa and Njamela takes a look at who's attending the Johannesburg Summit and why.
The leaders of the BRICS countries are expected to converge here in Johannesburg for the BRICS Summit. President Cyril Ramaphosa will join them as a host president. South Africa has also determined that an outreach that will take place with African leaders will ensure support for African industrialization and infrastructure development. For this outreach, a number of African countries have been invited in various capacities. These include Rwanda as the chair of the African Union. Namibia will also attend as the incoming SADC chair, and Togo as the chair of the Economic Community of West Africa.
We're all looking at global leadership. It's not just leadership in our respective countries, but as you would know, we would like to influence discourse on a number of issues around the world that speak to Agenda 2030, that speak to the visions and the value of the existence of BRICS itself.
The head of the new Partnership for Africa's Development, or NEPAD, the president of African Development Bank, and 6 regional executive committee secretary generals have also been invited. South Africa will also be hosting another event on the borders of the 10th BRICS Summit, the BRICS Plus Outreach. It will be held to ensure maximum cooperation between the current South African chairmanship of BRICS and the Chinese chairmanship in 2017.
The Leadership Summit takes into account a number of things, including the development of the BRICS countries, but also looking at the African continent. And as we talk about BRICS Plus, it means that we're inviting more participants to participate within the BRICS ambit to ensure that our countries grow exponentially in terms of the political democracies, but also the economies of those countries.
Countries like Egypt, Argentina, Indonesia and Turkey have also been invited for BRICS Plus outreach. International Relations Department says the Secretary General of the United Nations will also be invited for the outreach. The Sandton Convention Center will be abuzz with activity. Security is expected to be extremely tight, and no one will be allowed to be in this vicinity during that time unless they have the necessary accreditation. Yolisa and Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And let's bring you more now on the upcoming BRICS Summit. Let's go live to Johannesburg. We're joined by Sifiso Falal, who is the CEO of the South African-based company Plus 94 Research. Sifiso, of course, BRICS was started with the ambitious goal of strengthening key developing nations. Do you think the member countries have really benefited from the BRICS bloc? I mean, have they made major strides over the past decade?
I don't think so. I think the idea has been a great one. It is not bad to be part of a trading bloc with turnover that exceeds $20 trillion. So the whole thing was meant to benefit especially emerging economies like South Africa and African countries. But to this day, the impact of the trading bloc has not been significant.
Would you say that that comes down to the fact that, I mean, there's been economic stagnation in South Africa. We've seen recessions in Russia and Brazil. So surely then BRICS is not really quite able to perform as well as expected.
It has not performed as well as expected. And I think the main problem could be the fact that South Africa itself has not defined clearly what it wants to get out. And certainly, as a link to the continent, we have not done enough to articulate the ways by which we can work together as African states to glean the possible benefits, particularly in terms of exchange of ideas with other BRICS nations. There's a lot that we can learn from economies such as China in terms of their economic reform. There's a lot we can learn from Brazil in terms of import substitution, for instance, and industrialization. But all of that is still pie in the sky. And the types of agreements that we have are not in favor of the African nations. A lot of the value that should be accruing to African states is undervalued. And the reason why it's undervalued is I don't think that we are entering into the right level of negotiations. And we're still getting pretty much the same kind of deal as we're getting from the World Bank and the IMF. So I think the negotiators on behalf of South Africa and the African continent need to up their game and not to undervalue the potential that Africa has and the potential that their countries can contribute to the economies of the other states that are part of the BRICS.
And you mentioned China there a moment ago, as you said, a country that one can learn a lot from. It is the biggest economy within the BRICS member group and, of course, Africa's biggest trading partner. Just how significant is the role of China in making BRICS what it is and kind of keeping it together?
It has a big role because China is the leading exporter of goods and the leading manufacturer. So it has a sway in geopolitical affairs of the world and indeed of the emerging world. And it also has been a trailblazer in terms of how it has transformed its economy. So it's very influential, but at the same time, the BRICS bloc of trading countries is not a benevolent trading bloc. There is nobody who's going to be doing anybody else any favors. So it's supposed to differ from the IMF and the World Bank in the sense that perhaps there will be inclusive growth, there will be shared growth, but at the same time, China will be expected to do what is good for China. And when they sign agreements in terms of advancing loans, in terms of infrastructure development, or whatever other engagements they might be involved in, they will have concessions in terms of minerals. They will want to take shares in businesses that they're involved in. So China will look after China's interests, and it all goes back to suggesting that because China is bigger than all the other economies in BRICS combined, it will obviously play a huge role in terms of influencing what happens in BRICS.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Sifiso Falal, for that analysis, joining us there live from Johannesburg.